my fellow comic book collectors, it's Alan, the Comic Collector Geek, and this is going to be a fairly special video. I'm hoping this works. I'm going to be doing a video where I share my screen on my phone. I don't know if it's going to work. We're going to try it out, but I have to do this because in order to show you the data that I was looking at, this is the only way to do it. So what I want to do is really look into the CGC data and the growth of the CGC Census. Now, the reason for this video is Ryan from Automatic Comics. He did a video where he showcased the fact that the CGC Census is growing. And he was actually showing how fast it was growing, and it was growing really, really fast. It's doubling every 6 to 10 years. That's fairly fast growth for the number of books. That shows that there's a lot of books out there and a lot that are getting graded. Now, there's more to it than that, and that's really what I want to get into in this video, where I show you what to see. Some maybe the more nuanced information that you can get from looking at the CGC census and some different interpretations of that census. Now, one of the things that people think whenever they see, hey, there's the CGC census is growing at such and such a rate and all these books are being added to the census, well, that means that, well, supply and demand, basic supply and demand, that there's 1,000 books, now there's 2,000. Well, now there's more supply, and that means that overall the value will go down by half. There's that kind of weird assumption that as the supply goes up, there's not enough demand to meet that supply, and that can happen. But does it really imply that? And I'm going to get into the data to show you that maybe it doesn't. And that's why I need to share my screen. I'm going to get into it. We're going to look at the data and see what does it really mean. Let's go into it. Here is the CGC data for Hulk 181. The reason I pick Hulk 181 is it's a fairly old book, but it's also one that's commonly graded. This is a book from 1974. It is a book that is highly loved, highly collected, and it's one of those books that is well established. What I mean by well established is it's a book that if you get it in a 1.0, you're going to get it graded. If you get it graded in a 0.5, you're going to get it graded. If you get it in a 9.8, you're definitely getting it graded. And ignore the notifications. This is going to be an interesting video. So the point is, if we look at the historical trends of this book, we can see back in July of 2001, there was 470 that were graded back in July of 2001. And that's really when the CGC census started, right? That's the concept of grading books was new. And people were like, hey, Hulk 181, that's a great book to get graded. So what happened was you get really high grade copies getting graded, because if you're going to get your Hulk 181 graded, you're going to go with your best copy. You're not going to grade your reader copies. You're going to get your highest grade copy graded. And there's two reasons for that. There's one, you want to get the best copy graded, but also there is no value in getting low grade copies graded compared to high grade copies graded. And what I mean by that is there's what's called a threshold. And if a book is under like $30 and you pay $30 to get it graded, does it really make sense to get it graded? Well, no, it doesn't. So there's a certain point where it kind of makes sense to get it graded, that you get a return on your investment of the grading costs back from getting it graded. So generally it's when it's over $100 to $200 that it's in that value, high enough value that getting it graded will kind of balance out the costs of both buying the book and the grading costs. So that's what we look for, right? And with Hulk 181, probably back in 2001, it was a much more affordable book, and people were only generally getting the higher grades graded. So let's look at that and see what I'm talking about there. So back in July of 2021, we have 199, 298s, 26 9/6s, and then you can see like there were a few even low grades getting graded. There was two 1.0s getting graded, and so it's a book that even back then people saw that there was enough value in getting a really really beat up copy graded. But you'll notice the majority of the grades were the higher grades. Like really the most commonly graded book was actually a 9.0. So that's kind of where people thought there was enough value to get it graded. So they would grade it out at that 9.0. And we can see that there was 72 9.0s. Now, moving forward a half year, so these, you'll notice that the census dates are increasing by 6 months. So each, and it's sort of looking at a 6-month period, how many books were added to that census. Well, we can see that from July 1st of 2021 to January of the next year, there was about 200 copies that were added to the census. And again, still, most of those were higher grades. So you'll notice that the average grade has dropped a little bit. It went from being 7.95 to 7.86. Now, I'm not going to go through every year and every month, so don't worry about that. But let's get this concept. So early on, when the CGC Census opened, the floodgates opened. So people were just getting as many books graded as possible because there was excitement about getting books graded. Now, you'll see that huge meteoric rise in how quickly people were getting, like it was doubling every 6 months. So it went from 660, and then to July of the next year, it had doubled. And so every year it was kind of doubling in the number of slabs. And when when early on, that is kind of expected. So there's no census, and you kind of expect that. And as it went on, like moving forward all the way up to 2011, so basically 10 years later, the census had increased tenfold. About 400 in the original year to 4,000 10 years later. So a huge jump in the books. But also the grade average has dropped. Now let's flash forward another 10 years. And we see that in 2021, the census actually tripled over that period from 2011 to 2021. So, so really rapid growth for this book. And a couple things happened over that time. One, we had the value of the book going up. So getting the book graded at a high grade or getting it graded at a low grade both made sense. Preferably you would have it in the high grade, but generally, yeah, even if it's in a low grade, it's worth getting graded. And you can see that the demand for a book has increased because you wouldn't bother getting something graded unless there is a demand to meet that. Most people, when they get books graded, they're doing it as an investment. They're trying to make it so that they get the most money out of their book. But let's take a look at what's happening here. And I want to show you something that's interesting that really comes out of the phenomena of COVID. And COVID was an interesting time period because what happened was there was so much speculation and the prices had climbed so rapidly that people were just desperate to get a book of any grade. And you can really see that in the census numbers. So what happens is, if you look here at the 1.0s, let me just zoom in on the 1.0, you'll notice that 7 copies grew. That 53, that's in 2021, 2020 era. And then it's then 7 copies grew, 6 copies grew, then 3 copies grew. And then when it hits 75, Well, that's when the COVID bubble burst. and really people were like, oh, maybe we kind of overspent on this book. And what happened was, you'll notice, it was growing very rapidly up till that bubble burst. And then it just sort of stuck at 75. Now, it's not that I believe that there's only 75 1.0s out there. But what it is that people didn't see the value in getting it graded at that 1.0 price because there was just not the demand that we had seen during COVID peaks. However, higher grades, now I'll zoom out a bit here so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, you can see like the 3.5, it was growing at about 20 to 30 copies during COVID. And even after COVID, it was growing at a little bit, like probably at the end, that 430 represents that it was growing, still fairly rapidly. A lot of books were delayed in their grading. So that was sort of the end of COVID. But even it slowed down to just one copy getting graded over the next few years. So where is it where people are really getting the books graded? So let's go up a bit higher grades and see where the census is being added. And you can see actually sometimes it's negative. Like it went from 871 on this one to 870. And that's what's sometimes people try to get grade boosts and they try to bump up the grades. And you'll see that sometimes the census will actually go down for a particular grade. But you'll notice it's the higher grades in here, which is, what does this correspond to? This corresponds to a 7.0 that you'll see like a whole bunch of copies being added. And that is because that is the new threshold for this book. So it doesn't really make sense to get it graded when you're below that threshold. And if you're at that threshold, the value is there. So this is something cool that we can see how the market is shifting on a particular book, where we can say, okay, this book, more copies are being added. They still believe in the book, but do they believe it at any grade? Probably not. They're more believing it at that 7.0 plus range. So just something kind of cool to look at. And we can see that as this, the census has slowed down in growth over the last few years, because again, as I was saying, the number of the demand isn't quite what it was during the peak of COVID, and we can see like since the beginning of this year, let's say there was 14,000, another 400 have been added since then. So it went from 990 to 14,374 so that's a 6-month period. Now if you compare that during the height of COVID, you get in December of 2020 there was just under 11,000, and it added almost 1,000 in that time period, from a 6-month period from December to June. And then it added another 500 over the next few months after that. So there was a lot more activity. And generally that's kind of what you would see if a book is hot, or if a book, there's a lot of strong demand for it. And during COVID, you would expect there was a lot of demand. Now, this book is kind of hot again now because of the Wolverine and Deadpool movie. And we are seeing almost that, it had slowed down. Maybe in 2023, it went from being 600 per 6 month to maybe 500 per 6 month. But now it's back up to that, what was I saying, about 400. So it's maybe even slowed down a bit. Now there's a couple things there. And what I want to show you is that the census will grow at a certain rate, and it will grow based on the demand for the book and where people feel like they can get into a book. It will also grow. That growth will slow based on two major factors. One, how many books are out there? There's only a certain number of books out there. It's a finite number. Some have been destroyed. Some have been just lost to history. Some are yet to be discovered. There's only a certain number of books that are available. Well, there's only a certain number printed. So eventually the census is going to reflect that number. How many books are out there? The other factor that determines how many books get graded is that demand, as I was saying before. So if there's no demand for a book, there's no value in getting it graded. I've seen so many books where they have almost zero census count because there's just no demand for that book. Generally, the supply and demand element that we always talk about in economics, it really does play a role here in the grading, because it doesn't make sense to get a book graded if there's no demand for it. And yeah, so that's what we're seeing here. So I hope you enjoyed that analysis. The goal was really to look at the numbers a little bit more deeply, see these little trends. I know it's just like a big spreadsheet, sometimes hard to get all the nuances from it, but I hope I added some clarity to it. What did you think? Tell me in the comments below. Did you enjoy it? If you like this kind of analysis videos, well, tell me. I'll do more of them. Also, I would like to just one more time tell people about my Kickstarter. If you haven't seen the Kickstarter, go to the description of this video, check out the link to my Kickstarter and check it out. It's a comic devoted to Golden Age girls. If you like that kind of stuff, you'll probably enjoy my Kickstarter. I put a lot of effort into it. So, and it supports the channel, which is always good. So please check that out. And thanks again for watching. Bye for now.